people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fucking fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. The story seems to be that Claressa Shields will not be facing either Savannah Marshall or Natasha Jonas next, according to Ben Shalom. And Ben must still be in the Claressa Shields business because he does seem to plan on getting her a fight, just not with either of them. We offered her a rematch with Savannah Marshall in the UK. She doesn't want to fight in the UK, which is fair enough, Shalom told Sky Sports. I think that they're looking at an option in the US. Hopefully on Sky, it won't be Jonas and it won't be Marshall. We made the offer that we needed to for her to come back for the rematch, and it was turned down. I think the general point is she doesn't want to fight in the UK next. Well, where was she planning on fighting Natasha Jonas if Sky and Boxer are bankrolling the fight? It sounds a lot like Claressa's aversion to fighting in the UK was specific to a Savannah Marshall rematch, but not a Natasha Jonas fight. How's that work? Shalom still expects a Shields versus Marshall rematch to happen down the line. It will happen, to be fair. Shields feels it isn't the right time, Shalom said. It's not the natural time to do it. Maybe the rematch is at 168 pounds where it's a bit more even. So Claressa's looking at an option here in the United States, and Natasha and Savannah, they're going to be fighting in other bouts as well. Options being scarce at or around these weights. One fight that I think makes a lot of sense for Claressa here in America is a Raquel Miller fight. Raquel, who was in action not that long ago, she's an unbeaten fighter, comes from a good amateur background, and her and Claressa have history. Meanwhile, Ben Shalom will also be finalizing a fight for Natasha Jonas for a date in either May or June. She will have another fight, he said. We think we've got a big fight for her. Probably announce that within next week. We will have big news for the both of them, both Marshall and Jonas, in the next week or so. Natasha Jonas not that long ago was supposed to be in talks to fight Claressa in defense of her 3 alphabet titles at junior middleweight, but reportedly she turned that offer down, and that offer was made to her by way of Boxer and Ben Shalom. Now, whether or not you want to hold it against Natasha Jonas that she turned down an offer to face Claressa, I will leave such judgments up to you, but as far as what I think, I'm glad they're not fighting because that fight was a mismatch. Natasha Jonas is both older and smaller, and I'd wager she's also somewhat slower than Claressa Shields, who is at the peak of her physical prowess and her powers. She may have just enough to beat some of those girls up there at junior middleweight, but opposite the ring, Claressa Shields, she'd be biting off more than she could chew, and I've said that many times already. So who is she going to end up fighting? If it's not Claressa, hard to say. Doesn't look like it's going to be Hannah Rankin, former WBA junior middleweight champion Hannah Rankin. She's supposed to be fighting in both the WBC and WBA final eliminator opposite the ring's Slovenia zone, Emma Kozin. Now, I suppose that if Ben Shalom and Boxer make Hannah Rankin an offer outright, she can skip that Emma Kozin fight, the final eliminator, and take on Natasha Jonas straight away in either May or June. That's possible. Though on the premise that it doesn't happen that way, that Natasha doesn't fight Claressa and she doesn't fight Hannah, one other name that almost immediately comes to mind is the name of former WBC junior middleweight champion of Poland, Ewa Pietzkowska. You might recall that her and Natasha were supposed to fight when Natasha first moved up in weight, but Ewa ended up pulling out for one reason or another, and Chris Namath stood in her place. So, maybe they revisit that fight. Maybe they reschedule it. Ben Shalom indicates that they will have big news, quote-unquote big news, for the both of them, for both Natasha and Savannah. I'm not quite sure that a Pietzkowska fight qualifies as big news, but that is one name. That's one fighter that she could end up fighting. It's possible. When it comes to Savannah actually has more options than either Natasha Jonas or Claressa Shields. You know, Savannah can take on former unified middleweight champion Christina Hammer, former unified super middleweight champion Aline Cedar-Ruz, who's coming right off a loss, the same as Savannah. She could fight either of them. She could fight former unified multi-weight champion Hannah Gabriel, or current reigning undisputed super middleweight champion Franchon Cruz. I will say that a fight with Franchon is less than ideal because Savannah's on the bounce. on the rebound. You want to get her back in the winner's bracket ahead of a fight like that, though Ben did indicate that the Shields versus Marshall rematch may take place down the line at super middleweight. Minimum, what that indicates is Savannah does plan on moving up.
Does sound like she's moving up to super middleweight.
And if she is, it's only a matter of time before she shares the ring with Franchon. That fight is an eventuality, even if it isn't next.
It's only a matter of time.
Yeah, Savannah's got options, good ones, whereas options are a little bit more scarce for Natasha down there at junior middle and for Clarissa at middle.
It's mostly because Natasha's already collected most of the belts at junior middle, save Terry Harper's, who she doesn't want to fight for some reason. Clarissa's been cleaning house at these weights for years.
She's already fought the who's who fighters at these weights, the vast majority of them, thus she doesn't have that many options moving forward.
Creating that scarcity of options. These weights not having all that many fighters campaigning in them to begin with, coupled with Clarissa having fought most of the good ones, most of the good fighters.
That's what creates that scarcity. Raquel Miller, unbeaten Raquel Miller, who I mentioned earlier, is one of the few remaining fighters that Clarissa hasn't fought yet.
Ben said they're looking at an option in America. I wonder who's going to bankroll it.
Clarissa Shields is not attached to any particular platform here in the United States. So I don't know. Maybe Black Prime picks her up.
Maybe they bankroll her next fight. It's going to be interesting to see who these three individual fighters end up fighting.
Because the official word is they're not going to be fighting each other.
For me, it's not about me versus Eddie. It's just you ask me a question, I'm going to give my honest opinion. I think as a businessman, amazing. I think as my first promoter to get me from the Olympics to where I have been, amazing. But it's like anything. You have a partner. I don't want to talk about your partner, but someone has a partner. I just want to change the whole thing. It's been a great relationship. You can't take away what you've learned and what you've gained in that relationship. And once it's ended, they start doing stuff behind the scenes. That's like no, you can't talk on, but you know what's going on, and you have the private conversations between you and them. You know what that person's really like. So that's all. I'm just talking from my own personal experience. I don't care what anyone's seen, I don't care what anyone's heard. I know between myself and him. But the problem is, and for him anyway, is that when you move with that kind of energy, you end up making mistakes. And he's made a few behind the scenes, and I believe he's made an even bigger one, but we'll get to that.
So it continues. You could argue that Lawrence Okolie is only addressing the questions that he's being asked, though that still means the journos are more interested in Lawrence Okolie's relationship with Eddie Hearn, or the lack thereof, than his upcoming fight and what he means to do after that. They're not talking about unification matches that may be in the works for Lawrence. There are 3 other champions at this weight after all.
I haven't seen any of the journos ask about that all fight week.
Lawrence stresses that he doesn't have to prove what it is he's been saying, what he's been saying to most any journalist that is willing to ask and anyone that is willing to listen in reference to Eddie Hearn and how he's vindictive and jealous and all these different things. He says he doesn't have to prove it.
That's fine.
He's well aware of what's happening behind the scenes and what kind of conversations, so on and so forth, have been going on.
But I'll be honest, it seems like the biggest arm of promotion for Lawrence these days is still Eddie Hearn.
Even though he's with Boxer now.
Someone who's in a position like Eddie, born rich.
Is that supposed to be a bad thing?
Continues to be rich. It's not jealousy of money, but it's character traits. Like me and Eddie, like he can say what he wants online. We've had our own personal conversations, and stuff that's going on behind the scenes shows me he's vindictive. Like I don't need to sit here and prove it to everyone.
He's likely referencing the ongoing lawsuit that Eddie Hearn has levied against either him or Ben Shalom.
Eddie Hearn said that Lawrence Okolie still owed Matchroom 1 fight.
I vaguely recall Lawrence saying that he was a network and promotional free agent, that he didn't owe them anything.
Seems to be a discrepancy.
Though if there is, it seems a more business-related thing than anything else.
He's showing it with his actions with myself, with other fighters.
Lawrence Okolie is fighting this weekend. Not one person. You could literally walk down any high street in the country and say to someone, "Have you heard of Lawrence Okolie?" And the answer is no.
Well now, Eddie, you've been the one promoting him the last couple of years, so that's an indictment on you just as much as it's an indictment on him.
Do you know he's fighting this weekend? No. The only relevant news topic for Lawrence Okolie in this promotion is Eddie Hearn.
Now there, I agree. You could make the argument that Lawrence is only addressing this Eddie Hearn stuff because the journos keep asking him about it, but he could at any point shut that conversation down and talk about his career moving forward, now that he's not with Eddie Hearn.
He chooses to keep talking about this stuff to more than one media outlet. He chooses to keep talking about it to anybody that asks.
And it does seem like the biggest arm of promotion for Lawrence Okolie's next fight is bringing up Eddie Hearn.
So, this new promotional platform, right? It's not even on any kind of really relevant platform in America or globally. There's no distribution really with any major platforms.
He's not wrong there. Lawrence Okolie's next fight against David Fleshlight will be shown here in America by way of ProBox, an obscure platform that most people aren't familiar with.
Thus, it's not a major platform.
The audience is tiny in comparison to a Matchroom show.
I'm not surprised to hear that. Moreover, I believe it. Most people seem interested in what's going on between Lawrence and Eddie as opposed to Lawrence and David Light or Lawrence and any of the other champions at this weight. I mean, seriously, all week, I didn't see anybody asking about that.
I didn't see either Ben Shalom or Lawrence Okolie bring it up.
And you know what? If by some chance I missed it, and they did, that doesn't seem to be what people are interested in. The boxing community at large or the journalists that cater to them.
It's just being honest.
So this unbelievable move that's going to get you so much more exposure, no one knows you're fighting, they're giving away free tickets, there's no international TV distribution, and the only thing that's making it relevant is conversations about me.
Get a look. Get a gander by way of IFL TV, Seconds Out, Boxing Social, Boxing King Media, you name it. It's out there, and it's all centered around Eddie Hearn, not who Okolie's fighting or who he plans to fight afterwards.
I maintain my original position that in order to really stick it to Eddie Hearn, in order to really one-up him,
This isn't how you do it. The way you stick it to Eddie Hearn is you promote the hell out of Lawrence Okolie. You make him the star that Eddie didn't make him. That's if you can do that.
in my previous video, we talked about how Eddie Hearn himself speculated that these guys like Joshua Buatsi and Lawrence Okolie, guys that have left Matchroom for Boxer, they're being coaxed, they're being coached to go out to the media and say this stuff.
They're not even talking about their careers so much as they're talking about their old promoter.
You leave Matchroom for Boxer, so all that you could talk about is Eddie Hearn?
And it's consistent. It's across the board. It's not just with Lawrence Okolie. The press conference they had for Joshua Buatsi to announce that he crossed over to Boxer, outside of saying this and that about the DAZN platform.
What the hell was that press conference really about?
I mean, we now know that Joshua Buatsi is going to be fighting Stipian, but you know, that news came afterwards. In the actual press conference they held for Joshua Buatsi, all he did was throw shade at the DAZN platform, the way that Lawrence Okolie's now throwing shade at Eddie Hearn.
That's the most attention either of those guys are getting.
And if this is still going on ahead of Joshua Buatsi's next fight, I mean, if this is still going on weeks from now, months from now, it's going to be that much more obvious that these guys are being
If
coached.
this is Ben's way of sticking it to Eddie, this is childish. This is no substitute for actual promotion.
You're not going to turn either of these guys into stars by having them moan to the media about mean old Eddie who doesn't promote them anymore anyway.
Isn't that chapter closed?
Shouldn't they be telling you about all the exciting things that the people at Boxer and Sky Sports have planned for them?
One would think.
And finally, in men's middleweight and light heavyweight news, I'm sure most of you have heard by now per tweet from Michael Benson that Dimitri Bivol versus Jaime Munguia is being explored to potentially take place on June 10th for Dimitri Bivol's WBA light heavyweight world title, Eddie Hearn has revealed. A more arbitrary, pointless fight could not be made. Boxing Jaime Munguia, who is an unbeaten fighter and a former junior middleweight champion.
Dimitri beating Jaime does nothing for Dimitri's legacy, does nothing for his career.
I suppose that Dimitri's in a pinch because there's not that many big fights at light heavyweight to go around that are immediately accessible to him.
He's already been there and done that with a good number of the relevant light heavyweights the last couple of years. Jean Pascal, Joe Smith Jr., more recently Zerto
They
Ramirez.
tried to get him a Joshua Buatsi fight, but we know what happened there. Joshua Buatsi fled to the shores of Sky Sports and Boxer for safe haven. He didn't want that smoke.
The most logical fight for Dimitri Bivol at this point, given the number of successful title defenses he's already amassed, would be an Artur Beterbiev fight. Artur Beterbiev, the only other champion at this weight. The problem is, Artur's currently under orders to fight Callum Smith.
And it looks like they've gotten the ball rolling when it comes to that, so he neither has Callum Smith or Artur Beterbiev to turn to. Enter Jaime Munguia,
who for the longest time has been the subject of a lot of criticism, that he really needs to step up in class and step up in competition, though I don't think this is what people had in mind. They wanted to see him start fighting the best fighters at his own weight.
Not up there at light heavyweight, not opposite the ring, Dmitry Bivol. The contest...
Contest? What the hell do you mean, contest?
Really wouldn't be a contest at all. Dmitry Bivol would go into that fight the overwhelming favorite. Jaime Munguia, a young unbeaten fighter that he might be strong, albeit limited.
He can do all right for himself as a middleweight and even a super middleweight, but as a light heavyweight, he's a fish out of water.
He don't belong up there, and he don't belong in the same ring as a Dmitry Bivol. Thus, the fight's appeal and its overall attractiveness is not attractive or interesting at all. I mean, what does Golden Boy Promotions get out of sending him up there to light heavyweight anyway?
It doesn't make sense.
Not for them. What do they get out of this? For doing this and sending him up there, you might as well have sent them to Showtime to box JonasMarshall. He stands a better chance of victory against that guy than this guy.
Didn't you guys just set up a fight between your fighter, your prize stallion, Ryan Garcia, and Gervonta Davis, who boxes on...
He's on Showtime, isn't he?
You know, I don't know. Maybe all the relevant middleweights are what passes for a relevant middleweight these days. Maybe all of them are spoken for. JonasMarshall is supposed to be coming back in June.
Don't know who against. His mandatory challenger, WBC interim champion Carlos Adames. I think he's supposed to be fighting Julian Williams.
Erslan Lara, newly crowned WBA middleweight champion, he's under orders to fight Australia's own Michael Zarafa.
Yanni Bekalim Kanalai, this division's WBO champion. He's supposed to be fighting Canada's own Stephen Butler.
The IBF title, that title's currently vacant. Esquiva Falcao, he's supposed to be fighting somebody for it. Don't know who.
I feel like it could have been Jaime, should have been Jaime, if they would have pushed for it and wanted it bad enough, sending him up there to light heavyweight to suffer his first professional loss.
Which I've no doubts he would suffer if he actually were in the ring with Dmitry Bivol.
It's arbitrary. It's quite arbitrary. I don't know what Golden Boy Promotions gains out of sacrificing their fighter.
What do they get out of feeding Jaime Munguia to Dmitry Bivol, one of Matchroom's guys?
What's in it for them? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, this fight hasn't been finalized. The fight that Oscar was talking about, he was bouncing that idea around a couple of weeks ago. I didn't take him serious.
I didn't think he was. I thought he was just treating his nose again.
Doesn't make sense to put his unbeaten ward in there with Dmitry Bivol in a fight he would undoubtedly lose. What's the upside for him?
I don't get it.
Now, this preliminary report indicates that they're exploring that idea, though they have to know how this looks to their consumers, the boxing community at large. To them, it's not going to make sense.
And even though it's a battle of the unbeatens, a battle of unbeaten fighters in their prime, this isn't what you would call a mouth-watering fight. The vast majority of people would pick Dmitry to not only beat, but dominate Jaime Munguia.
Jaime Munguia, who is a mid-range to inside pressure fighter, more or less. Dmitry Bivol just dealt with one of those, an even bigger one, in Jaime's countryman, Zurdo Ramirez. Thus, I've no doubts he'd have no issues handling Jaime.
It's a weird fight, man.